Kia ora. Thanks for inviting me to NDF 2013. It's a real treat and honor to be here. I'm quite intimidated, to be honest. The depth of the talks that I've been at here have been kind of overwhelming in a way. You know, I normally do a disclaimer before I do a talk. I'm a software developer, so why am I up on stage talking to a group of people? Yeah. But you know, hopefully you'll bear with me. I do have notes that I've written down, which I'm going to kind of sort of read, and hopefully it's not going to get too deadly. But the good thing about the notes is if you do have a burning question and want to ask it, I encourage you to do it, because I have my notes and I can easily return to them. So, oh yeah, my talk is Web as a Preservation Medium, which sounds pretty heavy, right? But I'd like to dedicate this talk to Aaron Swartz, who some of you may know already. I'm just going to start my timer here too, so I don't lose track of time. Aaron, he cared very deeply about the web, and in a sort of heartbreaking way, I think he may have cared a little bit too much. I'm not really going to talk about Aaron today, but his work and spirit sort of underlie everything that I am going to talk about. And if there's one message that I'd like you to get from my talk today, it's that the web needs caring for in the same way that Aaron did care for it, but we need to do it collectively, not as individuals. So next year it will be 25 years since Tim Berners-Lee wrote his proposal to build the World Wide Web, and I've spent half of my life working with the web. The web has been good to me as a professional, and I imagine it's been good to you as well. I doubt I'd be standing here today if it wasn't for the web. I really highly doubt it. And maybe NDF wouldn't be going today if it wasn't for the web. Maybe it would, but maybe it wouldn't. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if we need the web to continue to survive as a species on the planet. It's certainly hard for my kids to remember or to imagine a world without the web in it, and it's hard for me to even remember it sometimes. And that's really the way of media. It kind of slips into the very fabric of experience. Today I'd like to talk to you, as I said, about the web as a preservation medium. So medium and preservation are some pretty fuzzy and heavy words, and I'm not really going to try to pin them down too much. I like the definition, Marshall McLuhan's definition, the medium is the message. The reason why I like it is it kind of disorients me more than defines what medium is. But the basic idea is that the medium, we create media, right? But the media kind of shape us too. And there's another definition that I kind of wanted to read to you, but this one is from Lisa Gittleman in her book, Always Already Knew. And she says, I define media as socially realized structures of communication, where structures include both technological forms and their associated protocols, and where communication is a cultural practice, a ritualized co-location of different people on the same mental map. I like her definition because it defines how important the social dimension is to our understanding of media. The affordances of media, how media are used by people to do things, and how media does things to us, are just as important as the technical qualities of media. Now, when Matthew wrote to me to invite me here, he said that in recent years NDF had focused on the museum and that there was some revival of interest in libraries. So of course, I'm going to talk about archives. But that covers all the bases, right? Almost all, maybe. Not me. But I think the spread of the web has unified the cultural heritage sector, showing how much libraries, archives, and museums have in common, despite their use of subtly different words for similar things. And I think preservation is also a similar concept to that. a similarly unifying concept. We all share an interest in keeping the stuff, paintings, sculptures, books, manuscripts, etc., around for another day so that someone will be able to see it, use it, cite it, reinterpret it. Unlike the traditional media we care for, the web confounds us all equally. We've traditionally thought of preservation and access as different activities that are often at odds with each other. Matt Kirschenbaum, in his a recent article that he wrote called The Textual Condition, he kind of dispels this notion by saying the preservation of digital objects is logically inseparable from the act of their creation. The lag between creation and preservation collapses completely, since a digital object may only ever be said to be preserved if it is accessible, and each individual access creates the object anew. Or as one of my colleagues at work, we were having a big debate in a meeting about preservation and access. I work in a digital preservation group, and and we were saying, well, we don't do access, right? Like, we're preservation. And he observed that digital preservation is access, it's just in the future. And I really like that because it just sort of ties up, it just ties things together very neatly for me. But the underlying implication here is that if we're not providing meaningful access to content, digital content in the present, then maybe we're not preserving it. And I don't mean like necessarily global access. I'm just talking about meaningful access of any kind, right? Like, could just be one person in the library looking at it. So in light of these loose definitions, I'm going to spend the rest of the time here exploring what the web means as a preservation medium by telling some stories. And I'm hoping that they will help illuminate what preservation means in the context of the web. By the end, I hope to convince you of two things. The web needs us to care for it, and more importantly, we need the web to do our jobs effectively. And for those of you who don't need convincing about either of these points, which is probably a whole bunch of you, I hope to give you a slightly different lens for looking at preservation and the web. It's a hopeful and humanistic lens that is informed by thinking about the web as an archive, but more on that later. So even the casual user of the web has run across the problem of the 404 not found, the broken link. These are some links that I found, you know, like. But in a recent survey of web citations found in Thomson Reuters Web of Science, these researchers, Hennessy and G, found that 69% of the URLs were still available. So 31% were lost. And the median lifetime for a URL was 9.3 years. The Internet Archive had archived 62% of these URLs. And in a similar way, a similar study of URLs found in recent papers in the archive preprint repository, Sanderson, Phillips, and Van de Sompel found that of the 144,087 unique URLs referenced in papers, only 70% were still available, and of these, 45% were not archived in the Internet Archive, the Web Citation Archive, the Library of Congress Web Archive, or the UK National Archive. So bear in mind, this isn't the World Wide Web of dot-com bubbles, failed business plans, and pivots we're talking about. These URLs were found in a small pocket of the web for academic research, a body of literature that's built on a foundation of citation, and written by practitioners whose very livelihood is dependent on how they are cited by others. So a few months ago, the broken link made mainstream news in the US when there was a story by Adam Liptak in the New York Times called "In Supreme Court Opinions, Web Links to Nowhere." In this study, the Times article is actually about a study that done by Zittrain and Albert at Harvard University, and they took the Supreme Court opinions, which are basically documents that sort of document what the decision of the Supreme Court is. And Supreme Court in the United States, as its name kind of suggests, is kind of like the biggest court, you know, the highest court in the land. They interpret the U.S. Constitution. They found that half of the the links that were found in these opinions were broken. And so by broken, they kind of, not only, so the 50%, it included things that 404'd, HTTP level errors, that kind of thing, but it also included content where the link appeared to work, but the content that came back was not the content that was cited at the time. So somebody humorously took advantage of this, and it wasn't the New York Times writer, I don't think, but they bought the domain that had lapsed and put up an article at a new page at the URL that was referenced, and the message was for the Supreme Court, the justice that wrote the opinion. And it's kind of, I don't know, it is what it is, right? But so Zittrain and Albert used this study to sort of propose a new web archiving project called PermaCC, which is similar in principle to website, where scholars sort of nominate URLs to archive. But I guess website is in this kind of weird state where we don't, they're looking for funding, basically. It's an individual, and he's looking for funding to keep this thing running. And so the model with PermaCC is that, libraries get together, they sort of nominate web pages, websites that need to be archived. And it's really kind of focused on the law right now. But so, Internet Archive is a similar player in this space. Here's the guy who started the Internet Archive, Brewster Kahle. And he started it in 1996. It contains 366 billion web pages or captures. And in 2008, Google engineers reported that the index contained 1 trillion unique URLs. And that's 5 years ago. So if we assume it hasn't grown since then, which is probably wrong because I'm sure the web has, and overlook the fact that there are often multiple captures of the same URL over time. So for example, BBC's web archive has been captured like 2,000 times. I forget the exact number, but there's a lot of, this is a very generous estimate, is that Internet Archive has about 37% of the web. And that's assuming also that Google knows how big the web is, because they even kind of don't, right? There's things that they don't manage to crawl, the dark web. So it's not really fair or prudent to put the weight of preserving the web on one institution. So thankfully we have the International Internet Preservation Consortium, which is a member organization made up of national libraries, universities, and other organizations that do web archiving. The National Library of New Zealand is a member and has its own web archive. According to the list of web archiving initiatives Wikipedia page, which may be out of date, but the archive has about 346 million URLs, the National Library of New Zealand's. You also, since the National Library of New Zealand Act of 2003, the National Library has been authorized to crawl the New Zealand web space, which puts you guys light years ahead of the United States, because we have to basically, every time one of our librarians decides to, that a site needs to be archived, like a political website or something like that, we have to ask for permission. And so this slows down things incredibly. And we can't just crawl like the web. It has to be focused. So even when you consider the work of the International Internet Preservation Consortium, which adds about 75 billion URLs, which are not unique, there's probably crossover there, we're only seeing about 44% of the web being archived. And this is all just back of the envelope calculations. Somebody may question me on, I'm sure that this is it's an opinionated statistic, because I couldn't find one. So I'm citing these statistics not to say that the job of web archiving is impossible or a waste of resources. Much to the contrary, I raise it here to introduce one of the archival lenses that I want to encourage you to look at web preservation through. This lens is Vern Harris's notion of the archival sliver. Does anybody know Vern Harris already? Okay, cool. Harris is a South African archivist, writer, and director of the archive at the Nelson Mandela Center of Memory. He participated in the transformation of South Africa's apartheid public record system and got to see up close how the contents of archives are shaped by the power structures in which they're embedded. Harris's ideas have a distinctly postmodern flavor, and they contrast with positivist theories of the archive, where people say that sort of the archive is supposed to reflect reality, or it does reflect reality. So I'm going to quote him here a little bit. So even if archivists in a particular country were to preserve every record generated throughout the land, they would still have only a sliver of a window into that country's experience. But of course, in practice, this record universum is substantially reduced through deliberate and inadvertent destruction by records creators and managers, leaving a sliver of a sliver from which archivists select what they will preserve. And they do not preserve much. Now, I like Harris's notion of the archival sliver because he doesn't see it as a cause for despair or angst. Rather, he sees it as a reason to celebrate the role that the archival sliver has in the process of social memory, and the archivist who tends to it. So I'll quote him again here. The archival record is best understood as a sliver of a sliver of a sliver of a window into process. It's a fragile thing, an enchanted thing, defined not by its connections to reality, but by its open-ended layerings of construction and reconstruction. Far from constituting the solid structure around which imagination can play, it is itself the stuff of imagination. So instead of considering the preservation of billions or trillions of URLs, let's change tack a bit and look at the preservation of one URL. Oh, there was my sliver of a sliver slide. This is the first URL that there ever was. So this is the URL at CERN that Tim Berners-Lee used to share with other people when people were first connecting up the web. Now, on April 30th, 1993, CERN made the, in hindsight, momentous decision to freely release the web technology software that Tim Berners-Lee created, along with Ari Luotonen and Heinrich Nielsen. But 20 years later, that website was no longer available. So to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the software release, Dan Noyes from CERN led a project to bring the original website back online. At the same address, using a completely different software stack underneath. The original content was collected from a variety of places, some from the W3C, who had sort of collected stuff along the way, and some from a 1999 backup of Tim Berners-Lee's Next computer. CERN also hosted a group of 11 volunteer developers to spend 2 days coding at CERN, expenses paid, to recreate the experience of using the line mode browser. I don't know, does anybody remember the line mode browser? Probably, oh, yeah, okay. So the line mode browser allowed users with an internet connection to use the web without having to install any software. They simply just telnetted to a particular computer, and you got sort of a browser in your terminal window. So what you see them doing here is sort of, they're doing some work to recreate that experience of using the line mode browser. And you can go to this URL and actually I could, if you want, I could click on it and see what happens, but yeah, it might not be connected to the internet. Oh. And so the cool thing about this is, like, all the links, you don't click on them with your mouse, right? They all had numbers. So to follow a link, you have to type the number next to the link. So if I want to go to the help page. Oh. I seem to have lost my photo. Oh, there it is, yeah. Anyway, it's kind of cool. And you can actually use it to browse other websites, so not just the original content. So you could, like, look at the NDF 2013 website in it. So this is my sliver of a sliver slide again. But yeah, this is an example of some, they cared for this particular website, right? They put a lot of care into it. So obviously, this sort of attention can't be paid to all broken URLs on the web, but it seems like an interesting example of how an archival sliver of the web was cared for, respected, and valued. The care for URLs is not something foreign to the web. For example, let's take a look at the idea of the permalink, which was popularized in the blogging community. As you know, a blog is typically a stream of content. In 2000, Paul Bosch, who's pictured here at Blogger, came up with a way to assign a URL to an individual post in a blog, which sounds, I mean, it's so ubiquitous now that it's just like, what? Like, that was really an invention? Like, but yeah, it was at the time. As its name implies, the idea of a permalink is that it's stable over time so that the content can be persistently referenced. And apart from longevity, permalinks have a beneficial search engine optimization characteristic, which is that, you know, the longer that URL stays there, the more people might link to it. And you know, as a result, the higher its page rank is in the search results at Google and Bing, because they all kind of sort of push the things that are heavily linked to the top. At least that's what they say they do. So a couple years before the blogging community started talking about permalinks, Tim Berners-Lee himself wrote a short W3C design note entitled "Cool Your Eyes Don't Change." And in it, he provides some often humorously snarky advice for people to think about their URLs and namespaces with an eye to the future. It's a really useful document still. One of Berners-Lee's really great insights was to allow HTML documents to link to each other without requiring permission. So I could create an HTML document and link to the NDF website. I don't have to talk to NDF website and say, hey, Matthew, can I link to your website? Is that okay? And like, yeah, okay, go for it. And then, I mean, the advantage to doing it that way is that if one of the sites moves, then in theory you could notify somebody and fix it. But yeah, that's because Tim Berners-Lee didn't do it that way. It meant that the web could actually grow, and sort of in an organic way. But just because a link can break doesn't mean that it must break. The idea of Cool Your Eyes saw new life in 2006 when Leo Sawerman and Richard Saganiak began work on the Cool Your Eyes for the Semantic Web document, which kind of became a seminal document for the linked data movement. Their key insight was that identity, or URLs, matters on the web, especially when you are trying to create a distributed database like the semantic web. Call them permalinks or cool URIs, the idea is the same. Well-managed websites will be rewarded by more links to their content, improved, search engine, snake oil stuff, in theory, and ultimately more users. But most of all, they will be rewarded by a better understanding of what they're putting on the web. Organizations, particularly cultural heritage organizations, should take note, especially their architects, and I put architects in square quotes there because I have sort of a love-hate relationship with architects. But libraries, archives, and museums really kind of need to become regions of stability on the web, where URLs don't capriciously fail because some exhibit is over or some content management system is swapped out for another. This doesn't mean content can't change, move, or even be deleted. It just means we need to know when we're doing it and say where something is moved, or say that what was once there is now gone. There are ways of doing this. If we can't do it, the websites that do will become the new libraries and archives of the web. So clearly, how am I doing on time? 20 minutes? Okay. Is everybody okay with me sort of ranting here a little bit? All right. So clearly there's a space between large-scale projects to archive the entire web and efforts to curate a particular website. Consider the work of the archive team. Has anybody heard of archive team before? Okay, that's good. The archive team are a volunteer organization formed in 2009 that keep an eye on when websites are shutting down or in danger of shutting down. Using their wiki, IRC chat rooms, and software tools, they built up a community of practice around archiving websites, which have included some 60 sites. One of them is GeoCities. I don't know if you remember that one. They maintain a page called the Death Watch, where they list sites that are dying, or they also call that pining for the fjords, or in danger of dying, which they also call preemptive alarm bells. But these activist archivists run something called the Warrior, which is a virtual appliance you can run on your computer. If you have a spare computer, you can just sort of run the appliance on there. And it basically gets URLs that need to be archived and then sends them back. So it's your way of sort of contributing to this little community. The tracker, they run a tracker that collects statistics, and it allows participants to see sort of how they are doing relative to others. Like, oh, I've archived 10,000 GeoCity pages, and you've archived 20,000. So it's kind of a game a little bit, but apparently it's quite effective for just giving people sort of feedback on what they're doing. And so the collected data is then packed up as work files and delivered to the Internet Archive, where it's reviewed by an administrator and added to their web collection. The administrator is, well, there's a few, but the really archive team is a labor of love of its creator, Jason Scott Sadowski, or Jason Scott. He's pictured here. He's actually a fairly accomplished documenter of computing history with films such as BBS, the documentary about early bulletin board systems, Get Lamp, which is about interactive fiction, and DEF CON, the documentary, which is a documentary about DEF CON, the conference. Apart from mobilizing action, his regular talks have raised awareness about the impermanence of the web and have connected other like-minded archivists, web archivists together in a way that traditional digital preservation projects really have struggled to. I suspect that this self-described, so here this is Jason describing the group, a collective of rogue archivists, programmers, writers, and loudmouths dedicated to saving our digital heritage. I suspect that they're kind of the shape of things to come for the profession. So I was going to sort of tell you another story so there is this archive team, but the reality is that there are actually a lot of individuals that are sort of working out on the web, sort of archiving stuff. And I was going to highlight one more of them. So earlier this year, Google announced that they were pulling Google Reader offline, and this caused much grief and anger to be vented from the blogging community, but it spurred one person into action. Mihai Parparita was an engineer who actually helped create Google Reader, but had left, and he wanted to do something to help retain both, to help users retain their data as well as the experience of using Google Reader. So what he did was he created this thing called Zombie Reader. And if it works, he has a little screenshot demo of it. Did anybody use Google Reader in here? Okay. So you'll recognize it, right? It looks pretty much the same, except it says Zombie Reader at the top. But so what he did was he wrote some scripts that before Google shut it off, you could run a program. It would go collect all your data, save it locally on your workstation, and then you would run a little piece of software on your workstation that would simulate the web service at Google that sort of made the data available. And yeah, it really kind of turned my mind around a little bit, because typically these kind of interfaces are very difficult for web archives to capture because they're sort of rich client interfaces. There's a lot of stuff going on in JavaScript in the browser, and the stuff that's going on between the client and the server is mostly little bits of JSON and stuff like that going back and forth. So it's difficult for, they're starting to do more of executing JavaScript while the crawlers are, the web archiving crawlers are crawling pages. They sometimes have started to execute JavaScript, but typically they don't. But even if they do, they sort of have the problem of simulating user behavior. So, clicking on this, like entering text here, it's just very difficult to sort of get the full snapshot of the application. See if I can escape from this. So this is another example of a sliver of a sliver of a sliver, right? It's just very small little web application, that somebody cared enough about it to create this application that preserved the experience of using it. Now, of course, .com failures aren't the only reason why content disappears from the web. People intentionally remove or delete, as we heard yesterday, content from the web all the time for a variety of reasons. Let's consider the strange yet fascinating cases of Mark Pilgrim, who, the strange yet fascinating cases of Mark Pilgrim and Jonathan Gillette. Both were highly prolific software developers, bloggers, authors, well-known spokespeople for open source and the web commons. Among other things, Mark Pilgrim was very active in the area of feed syndication technology, like RSS and Atom. And he wrote the feed validator, the universal feed parser, that makes working with syndicated content much easier. I'm confusing myself with the paper here, if you can't tell. I'm just like, which one am I reading? Like, so he also pushed the boundaries of technical writing by writing Dive into HTML5, Dive into Python 3, which were published traditionally as books, but also made available on the web with CC BY licenses. Pilgrim also worked at Google, where he helped promote web standards. Very, very influential person in the programming and web environment. Jonathan Gillette, who's also known as Y the Lucky Stiff, or Y, was a prolific writer, cartoonist, artist, computer programmer who helped popularize the Ruby programming language. His online book, Y's Poignant Guide to Ruby, introduced people of all ages to the practice of programming with wit and humor that will literally make you laugh out loud as you learn. His projects such as Try Ruby and Hackety Hack lowered the barriers to getting a working software development environment set up by moving it to the web. He also wrote a great deal of software such as Hiprocot for parsing HTML and the minimalist web framework called Camping. Now, apart from these similarities as sort of nerds, right, they share something else in common. On October 4th, 2011 and August 19th, 2009, respectively, they both decided to completely delete their online presence from the web. They committed what's been called info suicide. Their online books, blogs, social media accounts, GitHub projects were simply removed. No explanations were made. They just blinked out of existence. They're still alive in the physical world, but they aren't participating online as they did previously, or at least not using the same personas. I like to think that Pilgrim and Y were doing performance art to illustrate the fundamental nature of the web, its nowness, its fragility, its impermanence. Or as Dan Connolly said once, the point of web architecture is that it builds the illusion of a shared information space. If someone decides to turn off a server, to delete a website, it's gone for the entire world. The illusion dissolves. Maybe it lives on buried in a web archive, but its previous life out on the web is over. Or is it? This is my bad attempt at drama. It's interesting to see what happened after the info suicides. So, Y's Poignant Guide to Ruby was rescued by Mislav Maronik, a software developer living in Croatia. He was able to piece the book back together based on content in the Internet Archive and put it back online at a new URL, as if nothing had happened. In addition, he's continued to curate it, updating code samples to work with the latest version of Ruby, enabling syntax highlighting, converting it to use Markdown, and more. Similarly, Mark Pilgrim's Dive into HTML5 and Dive into Python 3 were assembled from copies and redeployed to the web. Prior to his departure, Pilgrim used GitHub to manage the content for his books. GitHub is a distributed revision control system where everyone working with the code has a full copy of it local on their machine. So rather than needing to get content out of the Internet Archive, developers created the Dive into Mark organization account on GitHub and sort of aggregated stuff there. Much of Y and Pilgrim's code was also developed on GitHub, and it similarly, people had clones of the stuff, and they just sort of decided who was going to be the new master. And sometimes they created a new organizational account to be the master, or sometimes people would take it over. So it turns out that the supposedly brittle medium of the web, where a link can easily break and a whole website can be capriciously turned off, is a bit more persistent than we think. These events remind me of Matt Kirschenbaum's book, Mechanisms. I quoted Matt earlier at the beginning, where he kind of deconstructs notions of electronic media being fleeting or impermanent to show how electronic media, specifically like hard drives, are actually quite resilient and resistant to change. Mechanisms contains a fascinating study of William Gibson's poem Agrippa, which was engineered to encrypt itself after a single reading and become unreadable, how it saw new life on the internet as it was copied from FTP, Usenet, email listservs, and ultimately the web. He says Agrippa owes its transmission, Agrippa owes its transmission and continuing availability to a complex network of individuals, communities, ideologies, markets, technologies, and motives. From its example, we can see that the preservation of digital media has a profound social dimension that is at least as important as purely technical considerations. So I think that that's what we saw with the Pilgrim and Y examples, are sort of this social activity that sort of, it transformed digital preservation on the web. It wasn't just gone. So let's see, I'm going to look at my time here. Okay, I'm about halfway done. This is getting, I do have a video I can play in a little bit, actually. Actually, this is where I'm supposed to, so the thing is, it's a 9-minute video. Is that cheating if I play a 9-minute video? Can I see hands like, is it cheating? I guess it depends on what it is, right? Are you in it? I'm not in it. Okay, so I'll play the video then. But this is going to sound like, this is almost going to be like an ADD moment, maybe. But there's a documentary that came out this year called A Band Called Death. I don't know, has anybody seen this at all? Okay, good. So you'll be seeing it for the first time. But yeah, the documentary is written about this band called Death. Basically from the early 70s, these 3 African-American brothers in Detroit, Michigan, they were a garage band, and they recorded a single, and they had a few hundred pressings of it, and they recorded an album, and they wanted to distribute it, the label, but they decided that they had to change the name of the band. Like Death was not a good name for the band, I guess. So, but they were adamant they didn't want to change the name of the band. So what happened is the recording ended up getting stuffed in an attic for 35 years. And so the clip I'm going to play you is one of the children of one of the band members who discovered that his dad was in this band. He didn't even know, right? And sort of the story, what I want you to pay attention to, I feel like an instructor here. I'm at the top of the pyramid or whatever. But yeah, just pay attention to how the web is used in this sort of preservation process. Hopefully it'll work after all that talking.
Julian moves out to California, and he is out there just, traveling, hanging out with friends and stuff.
And I had a friend, a roommate, who she used to go to a lot of parties, and she used to go to all these parties where these DJs would spin all these collectors, classics, and unheard of just anomalies and rare hidden gems and things like that. She came home one time and was like just ranting and raving about all this new music that she had heard, and she wouldn't stop going on about this band, Death. I did a little bit of research, and it didn't take long before I came across this website called Chunklet that Ben Blackwell had posted 2 songs.
The number one biggest game is when they gain number fame. Like a race at the top because they want to be boss. They don't care who they step on as long as they get along. Politicians in my eyes.
I heard that song, Politicians in My Eyes, and I heard my dad's voice, and it was unmistakably his.
Look ahead! See them fly! See the twinkle in their eyes!
And it turns out that there were these 3 black brothers in Detroit in the 70s by the name of Hackney. And I call up my dad.
And he called me up and he says, Dad, do you realize that they're playing your music at underground parties here? And I'm like, are you talking about Lamb's Bread? You know, I thought he was talking about our current reggae band. And he says, no, Dad. He said, you were in a band in the 70s from Detroit called Death. And then I just got quiet.
You know, Dad, were you in a band in the 70s called Death?
He says, politicians in my eyes, keep on knocking. And when he said that, I said, that's us.
I'm like, Dad, why didn't you tell me?
And then my brother would call me and be like, Bobby, you're not gonna believe this. Like, Dad and Uncle Dennis and Uncle Dave were in this band called Death. He was telling me about the music, about how amazing it was. It was like the best rock and roll he's ever heard. And then I play the MP3 and my jaw drops. Like I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. Like my eyes started to tear up. The hairs were like standing up on the back of my neck. I started shaking.
Or am I breaking out, 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 breaking out?
I just couldn't believe it because once I heard it, I just knew it was them. I could feel it. I was like, this is my dad and my 2 uncles.
Everyone's talking, I can't hear a thing. I'm on the moon, why is the sky so green?
I was one of the first people to hear the record, and I could not believe. It was unbelievable.
I think I'm walking up the stairs while I'm sitting right down in my chair. I feel so light, but I'm not.
It was raw punk, and I did not believe it at all. It was really a dream come true.
I was like, I can't believe that I know that I'm listening to like the best rock and roll music I've ever heard. And I'm the only person that knows about this. I started calling my friends.
Bobby calls me up and he says, I didn't pick up, he left me a message. He says, I gotta talk to you, I got some crazy news for you. And he said, yeah, I found out that my dad was in kind of a proto-punk band in like the early mid-70s. And I was like, what?
Then like I made him a copy and told him to listen to it. And he had the same reaction I did.
So I post on various message boards, punk rock message boards, and posted a long story about everything I knew about Death, put up links to the songs, and just wanted to share this because I said other people need to hear these songs. That post circulated all over the internet to the point where it got the attention of Robert Manis, who is a record collector.
I was still freaking out over that record, I'd listen to it all the time. And I was just blogging. I typed in Hackney Death, and this blog came up. So I dropped everything that I was doing, and I talked to, a couple of the guys at Drag City.
Well, we were talking to Robert Manis, and so Robert sent over some MP3s of the Death single. It's like 70s garage, like you've never heard it before. Just made us really excited to want to be involved with the record if we could. So naturally the thought turned to reissuing a single is cool, but if there's more material of a similar nature, then you can reissue an album. And that seemed to be the next question. Is there an album out there? Where are these guys? Do they still exist?
Let's give thanks. Lord, we thank you for this food that we're about to receive, and we thank you for our family and all that you do for us. In Jesus' name we thank you. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
All right. What I do for a living is I work at St. Michael's College. I'm on the late night maintenance crew. I've been able to give my kids the choice of going to college, do this job. I've been able to buy a house. To me, it's a good job that I can do while I struggle as a musician. Getting the call from Drag City was really exciting because every musician lives for that day when you get the call from the record company. But after the excitement of that part wore off, you know, it's just bringing up a whole wellspring of emotion. After starting a new band and after just creating a whole new life, all of a sudden, you know, something from the past just pulls you back and say, hey, what about this?
This is where we store stuff. For years and years, most of the death tapes were right here. And this little bin here, this is just the way it was on that day when Bobby called me up and said, Dad, please tell me you have those master tapes. And they were sitting up here, just like this. I was in such a blur about everything. I can't believe that I'm up here looking for the death tape. You know, I mean, that within itself was so surreal for me. This right here is the original finished master tape that was recorded at United Sounds production studios. As you can see, it's my brother David's writing right there. And that was what he wanted to call the album. Well, that's what Death for the Whole World to See. Of course, he put his signature triangle, which basically represented the whole death concept. This is the tape, and this tape has been through quite a bit, you know. It's kind of like older than any of my children.
Before I knew it, the album was released.
This is the album right here. Released on Drag City Records, February 17th, 2009. After all these years, 3 cats, 3 young dudes who just love rock and roll music.
Can you imagine taking 35 years? It's incredible. I don't know of a story like that. I don't know of one.
So thank you for watching that with me. I think, you know, it wasn't hard, right, to see how the web sort of played its role in sort of enabling that preservation. I'm sort of, so I'm got 10 minutes left roughly, and I was gonna dive into some less social, more technical things, which seems like the wrong time to do it after something like that. But I'll just say a few words about HTML. So as we saw in the cases of Pilgrim and Why, the Internet Archive and other web archiving projects play an important role in snapshotting web pages. But we're also starting to see social media companies are building tools that allow their users to easily extract or archive their content. And these tools are using HTML in kind of an interesting way. I just thought I'd talk about right here at the end. I'm going to skip this. Well, I was going to disagree with it, basically, because I've just shown some examples of where Rothenberg is completely wrong, right? Yeah, I was curious. Well, I imagine there are people that use Facebook here, right? And this is not me doing a sales pitch for Facebook, but because I actually don't really use it too much myself. But they have a download a copy of your data. Has anybody tried that? Okay. When you click on a button, it basically sets this process in motion that collects together your profile, your contact information, your wall, your photos, your synced photos, your videos, your friends, not your friends, like in real life, they're just messages, pokes, events, settings, security, and ads. This this takes Facebook a bit of time, and it took a day when I did it on mine, and like I said, I barely use Facebook. But at the end of it, you get an email, it says download the zip file, and you download the zip file, and you get this nice little package, basically an static HTML website that has all your stuff in it. So all your photos and movies that you've uploaded and all that stuff. Similarly, Twitter have you can request an archive same way. You get an email, here's the zip file, you download it. The Twitter archive is kind of interesting because it's more of a dynamic application. It's still, you can basically unplug your computer from the internet and use it, but it's more heavy on the JavaScript side, so you can actually search within all your tweets and sort of look at particular date ranges and stuff like that. It's actually kind of neat. So I'm mentioning Facebook and Twitter here really because I think that archiving services like this are really important for memory institutions like museums, libraries, and archives. They allow individuals to download their data from the huge corpus that's available. I skipped a slide there, sorry. Yeah, they're a little sliver of a sliver of a sliver, right? And when a writer or politician donates their papers to you, what if you accession their Facebook or Twitter archive? Dave Weiner, for example, he's a fairly famous software developer. He started collecting Twitter archives that sort of meet his criteria, and he basically puts them out on the web. But we could do stuff like that too. Yes, Twitter as a whole is being archived by the Library of Congress as big data. But why don't we consider these personal archives as small data, where context and original order is preserved, and where other relevant material, it can be sort of preserved along with other relevant material like physical papers or all the other stuff that archives get. So as Rufus Pollock of the Open Knowledge Foundation said, the next decade belongs to distributed models, not centralized ones, to collaboration, not control, and to small data, not big data. The other interesting thing about these services is their use of HTML as a packaging format. My coworker Chris Adams once remarked to me that the one format he expects to be able to read in 100 years is HTML. Of course, we can't predict the future, but I suspect he may be right. We need best practices, or really just patterns, for creating little HTML packages of archival content. You use your browser to look at them. The browser's probably going to be around for a while, hopefully. I think we see a similar development in EPUB, where reuse of HTML in ebooks. And Johan van der Knif at the National Library of the Netherlands, he wrote a study of EPUB, and he basically highlighted some different things that you need to look at if you're trying to preserve EPUBs. And the thing that he really focused on, or the thing that I really got from it, is you need to make sure that the contents of the package is all there. If it's referencing stuff out on the web like JavaScript or images or whatever, it's vulnerable to rot. But if it's all there, and we can assume that the HTML, the web browser is going to be around for a while, and the 20-year-old first website that was ever created, the first website, you can still look at it in your browser. Maybe we're going to be okay. Maybe this is me being glass half full or something, but I'm normally glass half empty, so this is a change for me. So how to wrap up this strange, fragmented, incomplete tour through web preservation. I feel like I should say something profound, but I was hoping these stories of the web would do that for me. I can only say for myself that I want to give back to the web the way that it is given to me. With 25 years behind us, the web needs us more than ever to help care for the archival slivers it contains. I think libraries, museums, and archives that realize that they are custodians of the web and align their mission with the grain of the web will be the ones that survive and prosper. Brian Fitzpatrick, Jason Scott, Brewster Kale, Mislav Maronik, Philip Cromer, Jeremy Rutin, and Aaron Swartz demonstrated their willingness to work with the web as a medium in need of preservation, as well as a medium for doing the preservation. We need more of them. We need to provide spaces for them to do their work. They're the new faces of our profession. Thanks.